Get ready to meet some brand new faces.
I'm an S in my data.
Oh, yeah, you're the best. Knock, knock. Who's there?
No one.
We actually have a friend called Peter back home in Bediddly Boingo, Idaho.
You like that, don't you? Oh, yeah.
Ruddy How, it's Harry and Paul. Brand new comedy, Friday at 9:30 on BBC One.
The FA Cup semi-final live. Can Watford cause one of the great upsets and end United's bid for the 12th FA Cup triumph? New Wembley awaits the winner. Watford v Man United, Saturday at 5:25 on BBC One. The BBC, bringing the FA Cup to life.
This is BBC Two, now a Newsnight special on ethical living, presented by Gavin Esler.
Ethical Man is dead, did our one-year experiment in asking a reporter to live a greener life achieve anything? Tonight, how far can individual action really save the planet? A year ago, we asked Newsnight's Justin Rowlatt to live a greener life. Tonight, the experiment ends, and with the Environment Secretary and other political parties, we'll be assessing how far you and I really can make a difference. And considering whether this baby is the real danger to the planet, we'll explain. Plus, the Defence Secretary Des Brown breaks his silence.
I accept responsibility, and I always accept responsibility as a Secretary of State, because ultimately the buck stops here.
Will his admission cost him his job? Good evening. Trying to live a greener life in a sustainable economy has gone from being the slightly nutty preoccupation of a few to the mainstream of political life. Many of us try to do something, recycling more, driving less. A year ago, we asked Newsnight reporter Justin Rowlatt to spend 12 months thinking and acting to help save the planet. This raised profound issues about how far individuals really can do much and how far government decisions on coal, carbon taxes, flights and nuclear power really are the key. We'll get to all that in a moment. First, Justin's final Ethical Man report.
I've had a challenging year. As Newsnight's Ethical Man, I've tried to explore every aspect of environmental living. We've been doing the obvious stuff and some less obvious things, like peeing on my compost.
What is Newsnight coming to?
We've had to learn to live without the family car while trying to hold our marriage together.
Stop it, Justin, I'm getting really pissed off.
Okay, all right. Flights were banned.
Oh, fine.
Then I jetted off to Jamaica to find out about carbon offsetting. Honest?
Oh man, my ass.
I gave up meat and I was forced to discuss the consequences.
Yeah, fart a bit more, yeah.
I've even had to smell a hippie's poo. I can't smell that, John. But how much difference has it all made? Well, last month we had a call from our carbon guru.
Tell us, Tim, how did we get on?
Well, Justin, I bought you a present.
Great, it's good stuff.
This is your carbon footprint.
That's our 10 tonnes, is it?
It was your 10 tonnes. And I'm going to show you how much you've cut. It's about that much.
That is a generous slice of cake in my book.
It is about the 20% I asked you
20%.
for.
That's all we saved.
Well, he met his target.
You met the target, and you have to remember, this is all the carbon.
It felt like more than that.
Yeah, because in a sense you did more. This is not just the stuff you're directly responsible for. This is all the carbon and all the goods and services, hospital, schools, government, and the businesses who make the things that you use.
The stuff we buy, okay.
So you don't have a great deal of control over that.
Okay.
You do have a lot of control in your home.
Okay.
And I've brought you another cake.
Okay.
This is what you have achieved on your direct household footprint. On my fingers.
Right, that's not bad, that's not bad.
That was 37% of your direct carbon footprint. So let's have a look at what you have done.
So how have we achieved that?
Well, you've done a number of things, really. It's not all in one place. You see, you've cut down your gas consumption a little bit of insulation.
A little bit, 15%.
15% reduction. Electricity is even better. You've got a 22% reduction in 1 year in your
So
electricity
that's just from doing stuff like changing the light bulbs, which, to be honest, I was quite sceptical
And
about.
a little bit of behaviour change, turning stuff off.
That will save us serious money. The gas and the electricity will save
It will
us
save
money.
you money and it's reducing carbon.
That's probably like
It's
150
kind of
200 quid a
no-brainer,
year.
really.
This is a great saving.
The car, 92%.
It's the single biggest thing that you've done. I mean, I know it was a kind of tough lifestyle choice.
So I suppose one disappointment comes here with these holiday flights.
Holiday flights.
Not the saving it should be, is it?
Justin, I mean, this is my biggest disappointment. I have to tell you,
And
this
mine.
would have been 100% reduction, but it's not.
This is the trip to Jamaica you're alluding to, I suppose.
47% reduction only.
How could you, Justin?
Not a bad result, except that during our year we've been responsible for something which cancels out all that hard work. She's called Elsa. She's had an environmentally friendly start. Bea even walked to hospital to have her. Not only that, she's been wearing washable nappies since she was first in, well, nappies.
She loves her bamboo nappies.
But you don't need to be Carol Vorderman to do the maths. We've cut our carbon footprint by a fifth, but have added a fifth person to the family. That means even if we keep up all the changes we've made, our long-run footprint is actually likely to increase. Through the course of Elsa's life, she is likely to be just as profligate with carbon as the rest of us in the West. She can be expected to burn off 3 tons of the stuff every single year of her life. And Elsa joins a booming world population. It's doubled to 6.7 billion since I was born in the mid-60s, and by Elsa's 44th birthday, there are expected to be more like 9 billion of us sharing the Earth. I have to be honest here, my family is playing no small role in that population growth. Elsa joins my other daughters, Eva and Zola, and that is just the start. Remember my truly ethical sister Cordelia? She has Dan, Oliver and Jake. This summer they were joined by Alexandra, Cordelia's 4th child. My eldest sister Amanda's got Jojo, Theo and Nikki. And my other sister Olivia hasn't been lazy either. She's got Lucien, Merlin and Juliet, who couldn't make it to this carnival of cousins. So is my fabulously fecund family being profoundly unethical? That's what this man thinks. He's involved with the voluntary human extinction movement.
They say we should make ourselves extinct.
They do, yeah. But I don't go that far, but I think there needs to be a drastic reduction in population.
Now, there's 6.7 billion people on Earth at the moment.
Yeah.
How many should go, do you reckon?
For a sustainable development, we need about 2 billion.
So you're saying 2 out of every 3, slightly more than 2 out of every 3
Yeah.
people should go?
Yes.
So which, for example, of these two, one of these 2 children should go, certainly. Which one do you want to get rid of?
This is not about culling population, it's about reducing birth rates.
But you really believe that population is the problem when it comes to the environment?
The impact that each human brings, the demands that they bring, have such a great effect that a growth in population would only be a bad thing. I mean, before you started breeding, did you have the knowledge? Did you have the knowledge of the impact of every single person?
I don't think the first 3 are quite close in age, and they're quite a bit older than Alexandra, and I don't think we thought all that deeply about that. We were kind of aware that there was an issue and we didn't really think about it very hard. With Alexandra, there's a big gap partly because we thought, well, it is environmentally really crap.
One thing I would say is that I can't argue with the numbers. Rationally, I can't argue with the numbers. And I'm not saying that people who have got kids are nicer than people who haven't, because some people who have got kids are quite hideous. Yeah. But since I've had kids, I actually care about the world more.
Then you've had 3 children, so your impact has just suddenly gone through the roof. So you say you've had 3 children and become more conscious, but then your impact has grown massively anyway. So your consciousness is actually...
So what's the right number of children to have?
People should stop at 2, I think.
I mean, on that basis, you've been really quite profoundly irresponsible with your outrageously large family.
As have you.
I have too, Ben. Yeah, I have too. What do you reckon, B? Why have we got 3 kids?
Because you kept nagging me to have more babies.
There's only one thing for it. I'll have to make up for the error of my ways by making myself extinct. And naturally, as a good ethical man, I've been considering the appropriate way to go, and where better than the Natural Death Handbook's Coffin Manufacturer of the Year for 2007, E-Coffins. So, William, what makes your coffins more environmentally friendly than, say, I don't know, a wooden coffin?
Well, bamboo being a grass, when it's cut down, it will grow back to the same height within 59 days. It also biodegrades remarkably quickly underground and is almost entirely emissions-free in a cremation.
So you'd be saying this is a more ethical option, would you? Natural deaths, green funerals are the fastest growing sector of the undertaking business. William sells about 12 of his eco-coffins every day. So you've got quite a range of coffins. What other, as well as bamboo, what other things do you make your coffins
This is willow from Poland.
Right, okay. So what would be appropriate, do you think, for a man like myself? You may think most coffins are made of solid wood, but they're not. 90% are veneered chipboard, which contains the chemical formaldehyde. So that's a large one you're looking for?
That would be a pretty large one, but we do have many, many different sizes.
Now, you say that your coffins don't create many emissions when they're burnt, but there are emissions issues with cremation, aren't there?
Generally, that's due to the teeth, mercury in people's teeth.
Because something like a fifth of all the mercury in the environment comes from...
I think that's right,
from
yes.
cremation. Cremation also uses a lot of energy. It takes 75 minutes at up to 1,100 degrees centigrade to properly cremate a corpse. That's about as much energy as the average person uses at home in a month. This is quite an unusual shape, isn't it? Slightly less kind of intimidating, less of the Count Dracula, more of the Summer Fate. In fact, William is building something of an eco-funeral empire. He'll sell you the coffins, and now he'll bury you too. He's got permission to use this field as what is known as a natural burial site. So why would you be recommending that I get buried somewhere like this, then?
Every person who's buried here will probably have a tree or some other form of native woodland plant on their grave. There will be no memorial whatsoever.
So you're saying it's less kind of impact on the environment because we're not putting up memorials and
that's right,
stones.
And there would be no need for any sort of mowing in the future. The land would entirely go back to nature, and
I'd go back to nature. I'd be part of the eternal cycle of the seasons.
That's right.
Giving the nutrients back into the soil.
Eventually you might become a tree. Someone might eat an apple off that tree.
All very idyllic. But I'm wondering if there isn't an even more eco-friendly way for this ethical man to go. Remember my old friend John Cossum, Britain's composting king? This is your poo. Well, I remembered something he told me when I came up to see him last summer.
I compost cardboard and paper and tissues. In fact, anything that's ever lived or grown recently.
Because you have got a few creatures composting away over here.
Yeah, you see, the thing is that dead bodies decompose as well. So in one of these, I found, I'm sorry to say, I found a cat on the side of the road, and I've composted that.
So presumably in winter, everything takes a bit longer. John's invited me back to his home in York. He says he's got plans for ethical man.
If you bury something, it sits in a hole where there's no oxygen. It's an anaerobic process. It gives off pollutants like methane. It's just a waste of material. And methane obviously is a very strong global warming gas. Yes. This is less global warming gases from compost than there is from rotting in a bottom of a grave. You end up with a product which you can put on your soil. So John, you've prepared a special compost heap. That is wonderful. That's so touching, John. There is a problem, though. It isn't actually legal to compost human beings. But given that this heap isn't actually for me, but for ethical man, John reckons we should be okay. I feel the urge to compost, though. Let's get going.
30% of all the food we buy is wasted. John's diligently been collecting discarded vegetables from local shops to help get my compost going.
Well, you know the best thing to activate a heap?
Yeah, I do, John. Human urine, but I think in this case, I think we can do it on this. But John and the ethical man producer Sarah have one last humiliation in store for me.
And you've already seen these, they are worms.
Oh God, they're really squirmy. I'll go on to report another day, but with my year of living ethically finally over, ethical man is going back to the great compost heap in the sky.
If you're still with us and not hiding under the bedclothes, before we get to our panel, Justin joins me now with some thoughts on how the year's gone. It's interesting, a lot has changed in the past year. What did you learn, do you think?
I think it's very interesting just looking at the project itself. When we started, it seemed like a really exciting and original idea to ask a journalist to live an environmentally friendly life for a year. I think now people would say, but isn't everybody talking about that? Isn't everybody a kind of ethical man and woman now? And I think that's in large part because the nature of the debate, certainly here in Britain, but also worldwide, has changed quite substantially. The Greens, obviously, have been talking about ethical issues for some time. The Lib Dems, to be fair, something they've embraced for quite a while. The Tories, in the course of my year of living ethically, fundamentally changed their position. Cameron made it the very heart of his revival of the Tory party. Green issues were right there at the centre of his vision for the Conservatives. And I think that really changed the profile of the issue within Britain. Labour obviously has done quite a lot recently, most noticeably perhaps the climate change bill, the Stern report, and crucially the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change concluded in February this year that it was very likely that climate change was induced by man. That was based on 2,500 scientists' reports. So the evidence now is really, really convincing that climate change is happening.
We've talked a lot about this on camera and also off camera, and I was struck that some of this just looked like a punishment to me. I mean, a real punishment. Did any of it actually
Some of it was, I think.
It was
in the film. Some of it was.
The worms looked kind of nice, but now you've wiped those off your... I mean, what did stick?
Oh, we were surprised, me and my wife Bea were quite surprised how easy some things were. We thought it would be a huge challenge getting rid of the family car. Actually, we live in a city well served by public transport. Actually, that was quite easy. And it was really more of a kind of challenge to our expectations. Once you embraced the idea that you were going to have to change, and I'd been obviously forced to make these changes, it wasn't that difficult at all. In fact, we found it so kind of comfortable living without the car that we decided to give away the car completely. And we do borrow it back occasionally up to sort of 6 weeks a year as part of a kind of car share arrangement with a friend. But basically, we found that fine. Other things in the house, changing the light bulbs to energy-saving light bulbs, taking a bit more care to switch things off standby, we found saved 22% of our energy bills over the course of the year. I mean, that's real money saving. You know, even if you're, not convinced about the ethics of it, the environmental benefits, you'd be convinced by the money saving. We turned the thermostat down by 1 degree, and that cut our gas use by 15%. Now, you wouldn't go back and stop doing things like that because they're, they're good for the environment. They're also good for your finances. So they're very, very persuasive. The one big thing that we will go back on is flying as a family, flying on family holidays. And because flying is such a carbon-intensive activity, that will make a huge difference to our carbon footprint. We have, I'll admit it now, bought tickets for a family holiday in South America. My wife's been invited to a wedding, and we will, all 5 of us, be flying out. And when you begin to top up the carbon for a holiday like that, especially when there'll be internal flights within the country, it really will affect our carbon footprint quite profoundly.
Well, I'll pick that up because now joining us are the Environment Secretary David Miliband, plus Chris Huhne for the Lib Dems, Peter Ainsworth for the Conservatives, and Sian Berry from the Greens. In a moment, we'll also hear from the author of The Sceptical Environmentalist, Bjorn Lomborg, who's in Denmark. David Miliband, first of all, on that issue of aviation, we've had a lot of emails from viewers about this specifically. Georgina Smith, Sarah Clayton, typical, they say, why does the British government talk green yet encourage flying? Because in effect, you want more people to fly, and it's a huge environmental problem.
Well, it's a significant environmental problem. About 5% of UK emissions, 5 to 6% are aviation. But it's
getting bigger, as you know.
It's getting bigger fast. But just to get this in perspective, surface transport, cars are 25, 26%. So it's 1/5 the size of that part of the problem. I think as a society, over the next 20 or 30 years, it's inevitable that aviation is going to take up a larger proportion of our total carbon emissions. But total carbon emissions are going to come down, because in respect of electricity, heat and surface transport, which together account for about 90% of our emissions at the moment, we're going to get dramatic reductions. And what Justin's managed to do in a relatively simple way is make a difference. What I would just add to what he said is that your original question, can individuals on their own save the planet? The obvious answer is no. It's essential that we have strong government intervention getting its own house in order. It's essential, secondly, that business plays a full part in this drive. But I think that the third partner is individuals, because if you look at the UK, it's about 44% of emissions come from individuals.
Just on a specific point, you know, there's been almost celebrations of Terminal 5, the success of British aviation, the open skies policy and so on, which may be all very fine in terms of business and people wanting to travel, including our ex-ethical man, but there is clearly an environmental problem if we're going to double the number of passengers by 2031.
There's an environmental problem from aviation, but what counts in the end is the total level of emissions. And it's significant. If we are going to fly more, and more people want to, we're going to have to drastically cut in other areas. I think we can do that. I also think it's right that we recognise the cost of environmental pollution in aviation. That's why, as a party, we've just put through the House of Commons the doubling of the air passenger duty. That's a way in which we can reflect that. Now, but let's, what I would say to you is, if the debate becomes only about 5% of the problem, not 95% of the problem, we're going to have a very serious
but it's just one simple...
More than 5%, I think.
And agreeing. Sean Berry, just on this point, because this is difficult, even as I said, for Justin to swallow. I mean, the bottom line is you want fewer people to fly, yes?
We certainly do. We'd like to wipe out domestic flights, for one thing. There are good alternatives for the train. We can make the trains better, and people just won't need to take internal flights around the UK. We can also do a lot to improve travel to Europe by improving high-speed train links and linking up different routes. We can bring that right down. And people do need to think very carefully before they take long-haul flights. They need to keep them to a minimum. I mean, what was actually... I mean, you were surprised, Justin, when you found out the level of emissions of your trip to Jamaica. Now, you shouldn't have been surprised by that. What we need to see is, what the Greens have proposed a long time ago, is putting the amount of carbon emissions onto adverts for aviation, onto the tickets, so that you see the amount of carbon that
like
is.
Smoking,
and you
almost,
take
like
that exactly like smoking. So you just see a health warning, you see exactly how your emissions are, and you can take them into account if you're cutting down in the rest of your life.
Peter, would you go that far? Would you say you shouldn't take a domestic flight? David Cameron shouldn't take a domestic flight.
It would be sensible if people took alternatives where they can. I mean, there's a huge cost difference at the moment between taking the train to Manchester, say, and taking the plane. It's much cheaper to take the plane. The economics are all wrong here. And David says that they've just doubled air passenger duty. Now, the problem with air passenger duty is that it actually isn't an environmental tax at all. Even Ken Clarke, who introduced it, says that it's not. I don't begrudge Justin his holiday. My goodness, he's certainly earned it. But we can't just go on ignoring aviation as part of the climate change
But is
agenda.
it a reasonable aspiration? I mean, Tony Blair put it this way in January. You know, I'm still waiting for the first politician who's actually running for office to come out and say that people should that people shouldn't fly.
Well,
are you prepared
as you
to
know,
say it?
we are actually consulting at the moment.
You're not quite prepared to say it yet.
We're consulting on some proposals which would involve taxing aviation more fully and more realistically to take account of its climate change impacts.
I was in a public meeting with Greg Barker, your deputy, who said that he didn't want to see any more airport expansion in Britain.
Well, I think that constraining capacity is probably as, if not more effective than taxation.
It's certainly effective.
Another thing we need to look at.
And
I'll tell you what is completely ludicrous is for the government to go on about climate change and how serious it is and to ignore the aviation issue altogether.
Christian.
Well, I think clearly we need to have sustainable carbon emissions right the way across. I think it's wrong to try and micromanage people's choices. But the thing about aviation at the moment is that it's actually incredibly lightly taxed. There is no kerosene tax, for example. There is no value-added tax on tickets. It isn't in the EU's emissions trading scheme. So in a whole series of ways, we're actually encouraging people to fly as opposed to take...
Would you go as far, but would you say, as Sean very clearly said, that people shouldn't take domestic flights? You just shouldn't
I think we have to, as most other European countries have already done, get to a situation where that actually happens naturally. People don't take domestic flights to anything like the same extent in Germany or in France because of high-speed trains. And we need to be much more proactive about developing a proper public sector train infrastructure.
Well, domestic flights are 0.4% of UK emissions. Obviously, I've actually just come back from Manchester today. It's nonsense to suggest that if you go onto the website to get a flight to Manchester tomorrow, it'll be you can't get a train, you can't plan a train ticket in advance that beats that price. So, of course, that the environmental cost of all of our activities needs to be priced. The truth is, for 150 years, all of us have pumped carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases into the atmosphere as if it had no environmental or economic cost. That's profoundly wrong. Actually, around this sofa, I think we're actually agreed we've got to recognise the environmental and therefore the economic cost of pollution in all our activities across the economy. What I would say, and this maybe picks up Chris Hume's point about micromanaging, it's wrong to look at aviation separate from heating, separate from electricity, separate from surface transport. In the end, we want to say, as a nation, our contribution to this global fight against climate change is to reduce our emissions. Just let me finish the point. Just let me finish the point. Just bring in Sian Berry on that point.
If I can just make a point about the aviation versus trains thing. The one policy that the Greens have talked about for a long time that the other parties are not even considering is renationalising the railways. That is precisely why train fares cost so much. All the train companies have to share the money.
We've got to be guided by the science about the overall reduction we need to make as a country. Once you're clear about that cap and the need to reduce it, you can then ensure that businesses, government and individuals make the trade-offs that allow us to achieve that.
You say not no to micromanagement, I agree with that, but the problem is the government is effectively micromanaging by actually indulging in an enormous planned increase in airport expansion, which is far beyond what is sustainable if you look at what we need to cut our carbon emissions.
I completely agree with Chris about that, but I do find it depressing that almost every conversation I ever have about climate change comes down to aviation and 4x4s. I mean, aviation is the hardest bit of the whole thing because there is no technical fix to getting an airplane off the ground other than burning a hell of a lot of fossil fuel. I mean, almost everywhere else there are existing technologies which we can use. Aviation is a really tough one. Right. We mustn't ignore it. We need to tackle it. But actually dealing with climate change is about a huge amount more than just planes.
Let's just hold the debate there just for one moment, because I want to bring in Bjorn Lomborg in Denmark. Bjorn, you were in the first Ethical Man programme we did a year ago. One of our viewers, Bev, emailed us to say, what is the point of all this? Anything I can do is minuscule compared to Chinese power stations, for example. In other words, to go back to the main point here, how far can individuals really change things?
Well, Gavin, I think this really shows that to be an ethical man, you have to be ethical. You actually have to end up doing good. And what Justin did after a year of, I at least think, and I think a lot of viewers would probably think so, fairly grueling experiences, he actually ended up cutting 2 tons of carbon. Now, what does that actually mean? Well, if you put it into the models, it means that he has helped with his family to postpone climate change for 1/500th of a second by the end of the century. And I'm sure a lot of people are, both the minister and some of the others, are sitting and waiting and say, but if all of Britain did this, but if actually all of Britain did just like Justin, you would have postponed global warming for 7 hours by the end of the century.
So is it hopeless? Are you saying it's hopeless?
Not, yes. What? No, I'm saying that we are barking up the wrong tree, that we are so focused on saying we need to cut carbon emissions now, which of course makes us feel good and makes it look good because we're really doing something, but actually ends up doing very, very little good. Whereas, of course, the real point is, as you also mentioned, it's about getting the Chinese, the Indians on board. As long as it costs $20 to cut a ton of carbon, we might do some in the rich world, but we're never going to get the Indians and Chinese. What we need to do is to make sure that cutting carbon emissions in the next 25, 50 years will cost $2 instead of $20, and then they might come along.
I think there's a lot of shaking of heads here.
Everybody can play the game of after you, Alphonse. You know, you go first and we'll follow. And if we all do that, then we all are on an absolute hiding to nothing. The reality is that the developed world, in my view, has to take a lead on this precisely because the developed world is responsible for most of the carbon that's out there. When we emit carbon into the atmosphere, it stays in the atmosphere for 70 years. And so a very high proportion, 70%, is actually there from the developed world. Okay, and we have to take a lead, and China and India will follow.
The Kyoto time frame, by 2012, China and India will have built 800 new power plants with a total emission of 5 times greater than all the Kyoto savings. That plays to Bjorn's point, which it's hopeless.
Look, it's really important to understand this. The argument of the climate change deniers has shifted over the last year. Even a year ago they were saying the science isn't proven. Now they're saying it is proven, but there's nothing we can do about it. There are 2 very, very important reasons for us to take action in this country. First, getting ahead of the green revolution is actually the way to make money in the future. It's important for our economy. Secondly, I have sat in the negotiations, even in the year that I've been in office, with the Chinese, with the Indians, never mind the African countries that are much, much poorer. There is not a cat in hell's chance of them doing anything if we say, sorry, we're not going to do anything. Unless we're willing to put our cards on the table, and frankly, let's be honest about this, unless the United States, 25% of global emissions, also is part of a deal, unless we get the developed countries to say, we're going to do this, come 2050, come hell or high water, we'll never get the Chinese and Indians on board. However, if we do that, I think we've got a fighting chance of getting them to realise it's in their interest, because they will be most affected.
Do you want to come back on that, Bjorn?
Yes, two things. First of all, I think we have a much better chance of actually helping the Chinese and the Indians coming on board if we make sure we reduce the cost of cutting emissions from $20 down to $2. That's investment in research and development, not about cutting right now. And the second point, of course, is we also need to remember that climate change is not the only problem out there. Now, at the end of the day, if ethical is about caring about the rest of the world, just to give you a sense of the economics of this, the standard economic assessment would be that Justin has actually done £7 worth of good with his grueling experiences for a year. Now, I would assume a lot of people would probably pay, 200 quid to avoid having to go through that. Had they spent that money, they could have done £8,000 worth of good dealing with some of the world's big issues like malaria, malnutrition, and HIV/AIDS. That's 1,000 times better. I would say that's ethical.
But Justin managed to save £2,500 of his own money through the measures that he took during the
self-interest plays a part of it.
Of course it's economic to deal with climate change. It's economic now to deal with it. There were some things, though. I mean, I think one thing I should point out is it isn't just the individual action that counts, and I was really disappointed to see that Justin didn't find it economic to insulate his house properly. It was one of the more expensive things he could have done, and it would have saved a lot of carbon, but it wasn't economic. Those are the sorts of things where government needs to step in. He could have saved a lot more carbon had the government been providing that insulation for him free.
A quarter of our carbon emissions come out of our homes. We're burning up carbon in a totally wasteful way, which actually adds nothing to our own welfare.
Why didn't you do it?
I didn't do it because I have to pay for all the changes I make, and it was going to take, the most generous estimate. It was going to take 20 years to pay itself back.
Money out of it.
You would have saved money in the long term if you lived long enough, though.
Of course you would.
Let's just be clear, the government and the taxpayers spend £700 million a year subsidising precisely the sort of home improvements we want to see, but Newsnight journalists' salaries mean that they are not the priority group for public subsidy. I've just had the cavity wall insulation done in my home in South Shields. 8.5 million homes in Britain haven't got cavity wall insulation. I paid £149 for that. That's actually going to cut a significant amount of the emissions that come out of my house.
One of the most effective ways to reduce heat loss from houses. And I would have done the cavity wall had I got a cavity. My house is too early to have a cavity. I don't have a cavity.
We'll get you
and
a
the
cavity.
problem is that as soon as you've got a complication like using the roof space as an attic, it becomes very expensive.
Just on one general point from another viewer, Mike Constable emailed to say that too many people representing the environmental movement seem only to favour the stick rather than the carrot, and this is alienating people like me. I mean, isn't that part of the problem?
This is absolutely essential, because if people think that dealing with climate change is only about pain and punishment, and I have to say that some of the things, Justin, you went through really are extreme, and they looked extreme, it wasn't all necessary. If people get the idea that it's about pain and punishment, they won't do it. We have to bring people with us on this journey to a low-carbon economy, and that is about creating incentives and about doing simple things which are going to save us money.
It's also really crucial that it's not just about creating incentives for changing personal behaviour, it's about creating incentives for businesses to invest in carbon-free ways of doing things we enjoy doing. And including, I've seen, for example, down at the University of Exeter in the West Country, experiments in biofueled jet engines, for example. Now, heaven knows whether that's actually sustainable in the long run, but we can do a lot through technology, providing businesses actually have the incentive to develop it, and they don't adequate at the moment.
Just in the couple of minutes we've got left, one of our viewers, Alan Benson, he also emailed to say the real way to limit pollution is to control the world's population. We heard it from Jeffrey Sachs. We also heard Jeffrey Sachs in his Reef lecture today talking about bursting at the seams, too many people. We heard about it, your population control problems there. Do any of you buy into that is the core issue?
Yes, I think it is. I think it's a very difficult thing to speak about for obvious reasons, but I mean, what it implies is that we must all tread much more lightly on the earth than we're treading at the moment.
And there should be fewer of us
because
to do it.
otherwise, you know, the darkest promises will
But
come.
even if it's right, we're talking about no foreign holidays, no nice travel, let's not have any sex either. I mean, that's what the other view is talking about.
The relationship since the 1960s between sex and having children has been largely broken. I hate to let you into a secret here, but, and I do think the reality is that most of the population growth has been going on in the developing world, and the major causes of that population growth have been a lack of female education, poverty, and particularly a sense that the only way to have security in your old age is actually to have children to look after.
That's another way of saying other people should save the planet for us, isn't it? It's another way of passing it back.
It's not. If everyone lived the way British citizens do, we'd need 3 planets to support us, not 1. So we need radical change in our lifestyles. Equally, the driver of the population explosion in the developing world is actually poverty. More hands to help grind out a living. And actually the economic growth, the technological progress that we all talk about and that we all want to invest in. I today was visiting Europe's largest solar panel manufacturer in Wales, which is a Japanese company now used to produce video recorders, now producing solar panels in Wales. That is the sort of business environment that actually can make a difference.
Just a final thought, Justin. Is your view of the past year that the environmentalists have basically won the argument, has broadly been reflected here, but things have not changed very much, have they?
I think it's certainly true, as David said right at the beginning of this, that there has been a fundamental shift in the nature of the debate, and I think most people, certainly in Britain, now accept that man has an influence on global warming, and indeed that global warming is actually happening. I think inevitably it's going to take a long time for there to be changes that will really affect, you know, the carbon emissions of this country, of other countries. But I think that the change is there, and I think people underestimate the extent to which this is recognised in countries like India and China, who arguably are going to be more profoundly affected by global warming than we are. And I think they do recognise that something needs to be done about this issue, and I think the change is beginning to come.
Thank you all very much. Now, the Defence Secretary Des Brown has admitted today that mistakes were made over the selling of stories by the Iran hostages to the media, and that he accepted that the buck stopped with him, though the initial advice came from the Navy itself. Paul Mason on how to turn a diplomatic triumph into a media disaster.
The military operation went wrong. The diplomacy went right. The media management turned into a nightmare.
I want everyone out there to know my story from my side. See what I went through.
So today, after being turned into a bit of a hostage in his own house, Defence Secretary Des Brown finally made his own appointment with the cameras.
I think people need to understand that as these young people who had come back from detention and come back safely were being debriefed, the view was taken by the Navy that it was in their interests to have an opportunity to tell the story to counteract the propaganda that the Iranians had put out using them. The view was taken that if we allowed them to do that, that is, if the Navy allowed them to do that, the proper interpretation of the regulations did not allow them to stop them taking payment. And I accepted that analysis. I wasn't happy with it, but I accepted that analysis. And when I revisited the issue on Monday and looked at it in more detail, I came to a different view. So clearly, with hindsight, I could have come to a different view.
Now, what Des Brown was doing there was taking a hit, not just for what the Navy did, but for something the MOD did, which was taking a half-day holiday on Thursday afternoon. So a decision known about on Thursday is only communicated to Des Brown by phone on Friday afternoon, and by Friday evening, Faye Turney is talking to the Sun. One of those who sold their story, 20-year-old Arthur Batchelor, told his local paper today, "1 minute they're telling us we can, and the next they're saying no more. I felt like I'd disappointed the whole Royal Navy because only 2 of us did interviews. My understanding was that everyone would be giving them. I can see why they've done the U-turn, but I'd rather have been told beforehand. If they'd told me beforehand, I wouldn't have done it."
It's all very well saying now, you know, the buck stops with me. As far as I can see, there's no buck stopping anywhere because he thinks he's buried the story and it'll go away. My great concern is that this undermines confidence in our troops, and it does make all these brave men and women look rather like a laughingstock and not a little disloyal.
The Prime Minister on the election trail in Wales today was asked when he first learned about the Navy's decision.
Look, I didn't actually know about the decision until after it was taken, but really that is not the point.
In fact, it was on Sunday that Tony Blair found out, and by that time it had been on the front page of the Sunday Times for hours. Meanwhile, in the Persian Gulf, Royal Navy boarding operations remain suspended pending a ship's inquiry. There'll be a statement in the Commons on Monday, and for the opposition, more questions to answer.
We need the equivalent of a board of inquiry. We need a full MOD inquiry that is then made public and reported to Parliament so we can learn the lessons of what went wrong and make sure, as far as possible, that this doesn't happen again. The second thing we need is a full explanation of the calamitous decision that ministers made to encourage our armed forces personnel to sell their stories to the media.
A board of inquiry, according to the MOD, usually involves some breach of discipline or procedure. But if the ship's inquiry currently underway decides the correct procedures were followed, the question becomes, was the military situation in the Gulf understood correctly? And was the political standoff with Iran correctly communicated to commanders on the ground? And those are questions for Des Brown.
He seems to have no sympathy with the people that he's leading. And I suspect that he will have lost the confidence of everyone in the Ministry of Defence, both civilian and service. I don't think he's going to resign because ministers in this government don't resign. In fact, I suppose he'll be promoted when Gordon Brown becomes Prime Minister. But I think he has entirely lost the confidence of the people that he leads.
If that is right, with troops in combat on two fronts and tension in the Gulf, the buck may not yet have stopped at all.
Paul Mason, I'm joined now by Lord Tim Garden, who is the Lib Dem spokesman on defence in the Lords and has also worked at the top of the MOD as Assistant Chief of the Defence Staff. You must be scratching your head and wondering how this happened.
Absolutely. I mean, it was bizarre in the extreme to follow it as the news unfolded. It was against all previous precedents, the thought that you would allow junior servicemen to sell their stories to the press. And of course it then meant what was going to happen next time there was an incident. Were you going to always have troops selling their stories? Nobody seemed to have thought it through. And I mean, I now think that the Defence Secretary has taken the right decision in saying, putting a halt to it for all time in the future. But what is extraordinary is that you have senior military officers advising the Defence Secretary, apparently last week, that this was a good idea. Nobody else can understand how it could have been.
I'm tempted to say, what would they know? Wouldn't the Defence Secretary, shouldn't the Defence Secretary advise the military about press relations? Isn't that his job? And their job, the Navy's job, is to advise them how to sail the ships and not get people captured off Iran.
I think Des Brown has been pretty good at taking military advice from the military since he's been Defence Secretary, but he's also been quite good at being firm when he's in an area where he's more confident. And that's another big surprise, that he didn't say, actually I know about PR, I know what the implications of this are, the political ones, but maybe it was the bank holiday weekend. I mean, ministers have big boxes and it's just amazing that nobody rang alarm bells.
The really serious point here, though, whatever we might think of this media circus, is that we put men and women in danger and don't seem to protect them well enough, do we?
Absolutely, and I think there is a great danger that this circus that's going on about whether Des Brown should resign or not over the media handling means we may lose our eye on the real issue, which is how do we get in this fix in the first place? There's going to be a ship's inquiry, as we know, but Des Brown should use this opportunity to take firm grip on his department and make sure that it's a thorough inquiry. What was the intelligence? How did we find ourselves in this position, particularly as we'd had a similar event before? What resistance to interrogation training would have been appropriate to the people sent in there? It's not the fault of the people if they're not properly trained. So we've got a lot of questions that need to be answered, and they need to be answered thoroughly without a cover-up.
And just briefly, if I may, how do you think this is playing around the world?
Well, I've just had 2 weeks in the States, and I have to say the reputation of the British forces has gone down enormously with everybody I talked. This will be very damaging for quite a long time.
Lord Garden, thanks very much. Well, for some final thoughts on all this, I'm joined by our political editor, Michael Crick. Downing Street seemed a bit touchy about what the Prime Minister knew and when he knew it.
Well, it's been interesting all day. I mean, you saw the Prime Minister there, and indeed Downing Street had been asked again and again when precisely did Tony Blair know about this, and have refused to say, and Mr Blair didn't say. I've had it confirmed tonight that indeed it was on Sunday morning that he learnt about it. Indeed, that he learned about it in the Sunday papers, like the rest of us did, which seems quite extraordinary.
How damaging is this, and damaging to whom?
Well, clearly it isn't going to win the Labour Party many votes in the forthcoming elections.
I think the real damage is the more serious damage, although clearly there's a lot of disgust amongst the general public. I think the really more serious thing is the anger, really, within the defence community, and the way that is going to affect the whole problem of discipline and morale and relations between ministers and the armed forces, and the whole question of morale and discipline when it comes to the hotspots like Iran and Afghanistan. I think that is more serious than the political ramifications.
Lord Garden suggested a moment ago there are much more serious things about the armed forces as well, but just the narrow political issue, is Des Brown's job safe?
Well, the interesting thing today, I mean, despite what Michael Portillo was saying, that the official parties, the opposition parties, are not calling for his resignation. He's reasonably popular and I think well respected amongst most politicians at Westminster. I think it helps him that he showed a great deal of contrition today. I mean, politicians never like apologising, but he came pretty close. I think that helps him. It partly depends how he handles the statement of the Commons on Monday, of course, and whether anything more comes out. But the other thing is that this is not really the time for moving people around the government. I mean, this government's only got a few weeks to go. Des Brown is a close ally of Gordon Brown. He'll be hoping to hang on for Gordon Brown to become Prime Minister.
Stay with us, Michael. We've got the front pages of the morning newspapers and the front page of The Guardian. You've got a better copy than I have, so you better read it, I suppose. Blairite plot to lure Miliband, who's just left the studio, into leadership contest. What's that about?
Well, this is an extraordinary story which, from The Guardian, suggesting that people who want David Miliband to challenge Gordon Brown for the Labour leadership are going to sort of run a kind of write-in campaign whereby he won't actually officially give his consent to being a candidate, but they will nominate him. Because apparently, when the leadership contest gets underway in the early part of May, the Labour Party website is going to give an hourly running total of nominations from MPs, and the idea is that MPs will be able to nominate him then, without Mr Miliband officially declaring. Well, I asked Mr Miliband as he left the studio tonight what he thought of this, and he thought, well, he just laughed it off and repeated what he said before, that he's not going to be seduced or bullied into standing for the leadership, and he regards Gordon Brown as a very good Prime Minister in waiting.
Well, just a quick look at a couple of more papers. Telegraph has Brown with an E, fights to keep his job, the Defence Secretary. They won't be selling their story. Minister calls growth for the Defence Secretary to quit. And that will have to do for tonight. That's all from Newsnight tonight. I'll be back again tomorrow. Thanks for watching. Good night.
Tales of adventure and daring do next on BBC Two from Ryder Haggard.
It's so unfair. You get no say over who's on your team. Then when it all goes wrong, you get the blame. I put in 110%.
Yeah, mate, we've all got a story like that. Who are we?
A brand new series of Have I Got News for You, Friday at 9 on BBC One.
I am a winner. I am.
Barry Humphries, Spike Milligan and Peter Cook. Sounds like a who's who of comedy, but they all star in our movie, The Adventures of Barry Mackenzie, in an hour. And we have some jolly good adventure right now, as BBC 4 comes to BBC 2 to savour the work of Ryder Haggard.